Letter 12. My dear Father, let me resume the interesting subject of which my letters have been so full. It is now 8 weeks since our return from Gilgal. For 5 weeks after we reached Jerusalem, we heard nothing of Jesus, until John, son of Elisaph, reappeared. He and Lazarus came into the city together and to the house of Rabbi Amos. Our first inquiry was, "Have you seen him? Have you heard anything from him?" "John has seen him," answered Lazarus seriously. "Ask him, and he will tell you all." We looked at John, who sat sad and pensive, as if he were dwelling in his mind upon some painful yet tender sorrow. The eyes of my cousin Mary, which always caught their luster from his, were shaded with an inquiring look of sympathy and solicitude. "You are not well, I fear," she said, placing her fair hand upon his white brow and putting back the hair from his temples. "You have been long away, and are weary and ill." "Weary, Mary? I shall never complain of weariness again after what I have beheld." "What have you seen?" I asked. "Jesus in the desert, and when I remember him there, I shall forget to smile more." "You have found him, then?" I eagerly asked. "Yes, after days of painful search, I found him in the very center of the desert of ashes, where foot of man had never trodden before. I saw him upon his knees and heard his voice in prayer. I laid down the sack of bread and fishes and the skin of water I had brought with me to succor him, and with awe drew near where he stood. As I came closer to him, I heard him groan in spirit, and he seemed to be borne down to the earth by some mortal agony. He was, as it were, talking to some invisible evil beings who assailed him. "Rabbi, good master," I said, "I have brought thee food and water. Pardon me if I have intruded upon thy awful loneliness, which is sacred to some deep grief, but I weep with thee for thy woes, and in all thy afflictions I am afflicted. Eat, that thou mayest have strength to endure thy mysterious sufferings." He turned his pale countenance full upon me and extended towards me his emaciated hands, while he smiled faintly and blessed me and said, "Son, thou art very dear to me. Thou shalt one day be afflicted for me, but not now, and then understand wherefore I am now a sufferer in the desert." "Let me remain with thee, divine Messias," I said. "Thou believest then that I am he?" He answered, regarding me with love. I replied by casting myself at his desert-parched feet and bathing them with my tears. He raised me and said, "Go thy way presently. When the time of my fasting and temptation is past, I will see thee again." "Nay, I will not leave thee," I asserted. "If thou lovest me, beloved, thou wilt obey me." He answered with a tone of gentle reproof, "But thou wilt first eat of the bread I have brought and drink of the water," I entreated. "Thou knowest not what temptation thou art offering to me," he replied sadly. "Thou hast not enough for thine own needs. Go, and leave me to gain the victory over Satan, the prince of this world, for which I was led by the Spirit thither." I once more cast myself at his feet, and he lifted me up, kissing me, and sent me away. Oh, you would not have known him, worn and emaciated by long abstinence, weak through suffering. He looked but the shadow of himself. He could not have lived thus if there had not been a divine power within to sustain him. His existence so long, for he had been in the desert 5 weeks without food when I found him, was a miracle in itself, proving the power of God to be in him. For what mighty work among men is God preparing him? Said Rabbi Amos with emotion. Surely he is a prophet come from God. Think you he still lives? I asked with anxious fears, scarcely trusting my voice above a whisper. Yes, answered John. I am come to tell you he was divinely sustained through all, and after 40 days he came forth from the wilderness and suddenly presented himself on the banks of Jordan among John's disciples. I was standing near the baptizer, discoursing of the Christ, and marveling when his exile to the desert would terminate, when the prophet, lifting his eyes, cried with a loud voice full of joy, Behold again the Lamb of God, upon whom the Spirit of God descended. He hath come from the furnace like gold 7 times tried in the fire. He it is who alone taketh away the sins of the world." I turned and beheld Jesus advancing. He was pale and wore an expression of gentle, uncomplaining suffering on his benign and spiritualized countenance. I hastened to meet him and was kneeling in joy at his feet when he embraced me as a brother and said, "Faithful and full of love, wilt thou follow me?" "I will never more leave thee," I answered. "Where dwellest thou, divine master?" Then asked one of John's disciples, Andrew by name, who was with me. "Come, my friends, and see." He answered, and we went after him with joy unutterable. He entered the village of Bethabara, and approaching the house of a widow where he abode, went in. We followed him, and by his request took up our abode with him. "Oh, how shall I be able to make known by words," added John, "the sweet expression of his discourse? And one day in his presence I grew wise. His words filled the soul like new wine and made the heart glad. The next day he wished to go into Galilee, and so on to Nazareth where his mother dwelleth. And as I have made up my mind to follow him as his disciple henceforth, I have only come hither to make known my purpose to Mary, and to arrange my affairs in the city. Tomorrow I will leave again to join this, my dear Lord, at Cana of Galilee." "Canst thou divine at all his purpose?" asked Rabbi Amos of John. "Whether he intends to found a school of wisdom, to preach like the prophets, to reign like David, or to conquer like his warrior namesake Joshua? I know not, save that he said he came to redeem that which was lost, and to establish a kingdom that shall have no end." Upon hearing this, all our hearts bounded with hope and confidence in him, and we all together burst forth into a voice of thanksgiving, and sang this hymn of praise. "O sing unto the Lord a new song. He hath done marvelous things. His right hand and his holy arm hath gotten the victory. The Lord hath made known his salvation. His righteousness hath he openly shewed in the sight of the heathen. He hath remembered his mercy and his truth towards the house of Israel. All the ends of the earth have seen the salvation of our God." There was this morning, dear Father, no little excitement produced among the chief priests by a formal inquiry sent by Pilate to Caiaphas, the high priest, asking whether this new prophet was to be acknowledged by them as their Messiah. "For if he is to be, it will be my duty," said the governor, "to place him under arrest, inasmuch as we understand the Jewish Messiah is to declare himself king." Upon this there was a tumultuous assembling together of the priests in the porch of the temple, and with many invectives they agreed to send answer to Pilate that they did not acknowledge Jesus of Nazareth to be the Christ. What Pilate will conclude to do I know not. Rabbi Amos informed us that the procurator had gotten some news by courier that morning that Jesus, on his way to Cana, had been followed by a full 1,000 people who hailed him as the Christ. Thus you see, my dear Father, that this divine person is already taking hold of the hearts of the people and arousing the jealousy of our enemies. Be assured that the day will come when he will lift up his standard to the Gentiles and draw all men unto him. Your loving Adina.